My name is Roberto Garcia. I'm a clinical professor of international business at the Kelley School of Business in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm also the CIBER director of Indiana University's CIBER. I'd also like to thank the U.S. Department of Education for hosting this session and to Rebecca for organizing it. The panel session was excellent. What I'd like to do is what Rebecca asked me to share with you is a tool that we use quite intensively at Indiana University in order to enhance our students' global mindset and cross-cultural competence. So what I'd like to do is make this session through a set of PowerPoint slides and a couple of videos hands-on to give you sort of a perspective and some tools that you can take back with you to work with your students if it works for you. So the topic of my presentation is using Globesmart. It's a web-based conference tool to enhance our students' global mindset in the classroom. What I'd like to do is invite anybody who's in the back and not at a table to come to a table, sit in any table, because toward the end, what I'm going to do is provide an opportunity, 10, 15 minutes, to share with each other at the table how you might use the cultural dimensions or a tool like Globesmart in order to work with your students. I think if we get some interaction going, you will leave with a few more ideas that would benefit our students. So I want to start by emphasizing a few things that were already mentioned in the panel session, and that is that our students have a pretty tough challenge ahead. The world, I think you would agree, that we were educated in is very different. The sort of work world that we envisioned 20, 25, even 10, 15 years ago that we envisioned is very different today because of technology, government policy, societal views, a number of issues. So I think we need to prepare our students for that. The old challenge of increasing the students' cross-cultural competence, that is to hold meetings to manage cross-national, cross-cultural teams and languages and travel and all that kind of stuff, that is still important, but now when we add technologies and travel and those kinds of things, the challenge, I think, has gotten more difficult. And we need to address that to help our students be more competent in the workplace. The particular tool that international business researchers have made available to us is the cross-cultural dimensions. So I want to show you how even working with 5 dimensions, we can do a lot to help students improve their global mindset and cross-cultural competence. So I'll talk about how we use Globesmart, and then we'll do a little bit of discussion at the end. And you have, Rebecca's put together a very useful book of best practices and contributions from many of our CIBERs that you can take back with you and use in the classroom. Okay, so the challenge that I've been mentioning is that things are difficult for students. And in many ways, it's more difficult than it was a few years ago because of what the panel mentioned, technology. I think technology, the speed at which we can communicate, the ease of travel, the ease with which our students now can get a visa, or the ease with which they can engage in a short-term study abroad program through our universities and even a 6-month or longer study abroad, I think has given the students the impression that it's easy, that you just go there, you kind of observe, and then you begin interacting with people and everything will work out smoothly. It turns out that the way many of us know by trial and error that culture is about a very strong sense of programming. One of my favorite definitions of culture is Gerd Hofstede's definition, which is that culture is the collective programming of the mind of a group of people. Globalization may advance very quickly. Our mindsets, what we learn from our parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, our teachers, our religious leaders, those kinds of things, I think, change very slowly. They're sort of hidden. And so I think if we don't work with our students to uncover the patterns, they're going to make a lot of mistakes and have some difficult periods feelings will be hurt, misunderstandings will happen, and that's where the cultural dimensions come in. So instead of, even though there's a lot of talk these days about the anti-globalization movement or putting the brakes on globalization, I don't think it has really slowed down. It just has become more complex. There is a very nice article that came out recently in Bloomberg Business Week that asks the question about, is globalization in retreat? And their conclusion is, no, it's not in retreat. It's just changing. It's just evolving. And one of the examples of this evolution is the e-commerce and the digital economy is making up for a very small slowdown caused by tariffs and the tariff wars between countries. It's a more complex and dynamic environment. Also, our panel mentioned tariff schedules. I recently came across an article from Columbia Sportswear where the CEO is lamenting that the world that his people have to work in is much more complicated. He had to create a new position called a tariff engineer. I'd never heard of what a tariff engineer was. Young people with digital skills, but with also knowledge of the legal environment who can pour through tariff schedules and then help their companies try to align the global supply chain. It doesn't happen overnight, but there's a big challenge to try to figure out how to get around some of the tariff blocks that are happening. So it's a more complex and dynamic work environment. The panel focused on information technology and different social media platforms and communication technologies, all of that. And again, I agree that many of our students, including my kids, think that they're really good at it until they meet somebody who is much better or in another country or is working with WeChat, for example. WeChat is one social media application that is like Facebook and I don't even know all of the social media platforms, but WeChat is like a bunch of these all in one, and our students are on campus in Bloomington are just beginning to discover that, whereas our Chinese students grew up with that. And then more and different players on the global stage. So when I was getting my MBA, the world was about industrialized countries and less developed economies. Now we have emerging economies. Not only emerging economies becoming very strong players, engaging in sort of like a changing world economic order of trade and foreign direct investment and so many other aspects of the global economy, but also they're creating companies that are now challenging industrialized companies for global market share. The Boston Consulting Group comes out every 2 or 3 years with a list of 100 new global challengers. Most of them, as you can imagine, are coming from, these are non-industrialized country companies taking market share from the G7 country companies. And of course, the largest group is out of China, followed by India, followed by Brazil and Mexico. And so that makes the global stage even more complicated. Okay, so what do we mean by a global mindset? I'll just read you the keywords of a couple of, I found 3 definitions. One is from Forbes. Global mindset is the ability to connect with people from other cultures in an intellectual as well as in an emotional way. I think one of the things we have to impress upon our students is that the emotional piece is very important. Matters of the heart, or how we sense and create trust with each other across languages and across cultures, it's very difficult for students with less experience to grasp that. But I think this is one of the key aspects here. To appreciate the differences among cultures, the ability to view situations from a variety of perspectives, again, to develop trusting relationships, to think of cross-cultural situations as opportunities. It's easy to see the problems, but can you bridge the differences, and see the opportunities out of that? Another definition, Rebecca shared this, the Financial Times shared this one with me, openness and awareness of diversity across cultures and markets with a propensity and ability to see common patterns across countries and markets. Diversity as opportunities and the ability to find good ideas and transfer knowledge wherever that knowledge may be. It's no longer just an industrialized country, first world countries. Knowledge is everywhere and can be transferred anywhere if managers know how to find those and transfer, do the hard work of transferring. The other, Manuel mentioned the transnational approach, and that is one that we use in MBA courses quite a bit. These are the types of managers who can balance some conflicting forces, balance global efficiency anywhere in the world with local responsiveness, and then, again, to be able to spot knowledge and transfer it to wherever that may be. So you see the themes here about the global mindset. Cross-cultural competence goes even further than that. It goes beyond awareness and knowledge to providing understanding, ability. This is more skill-based, I think. Understanding, ability to communicate, ability to interact and bring people together from across culture. So it's being aware of one's own worldview, developing positive attitudes, gaining knowledge, developing skills for communication and interaction across cultures. We naturally, when we grow up, we have sort of an ethnocentric tendency. I think it's part of the social process, the social condition. And so what we're talking about with a global mindset is overcoming that and involving the heart, involving more cooperation and wanting something positive for the other side, for those that we work with. Okay. There are quite a few tools for us educators to help us work with our students. One of our other CIBERs at Georgia State University, one of my colleagues, Leanne Liu, at Georgia State University, who participates in a yearly CIBER workshop that we give. Several of us here, CIBER directors, participate in that or lead some of those sessions. Leanne Liu at Georgia State has shared with me a long list of cross-cultural competency tools that we can use with our students. The one that I use that's on this list, I use it quite often, it is the cross-cultural adaptability inventory. It's fairly easy to use in a classroom setting, in a semester class, for example. The cross-cultural adaptability inventory is a set of about 60 questions. It's kind of on a Likert scale that asks the students to rate themselves in a number of cross-cultural business situations. It's very applied, very practical. And once the students answer the questions, it's fairly easy for them to score themselves and then develop a nice little map of where they rate on 4 competencies. So at the end of this, it doesn't take very long, at the end they get kind of a little map, a personal map that shows those 4 competencies, where they are strong and where they might be deficient. And then part of this tool also is that it helps them map out a strategy for improving any of their competencies. So several of them work in this way. So again, the idea of helping students assess themselves, us as educators with our experience working with them to highlight what they need to focus on. Okay, I want to share with you, as I move toward the cultural dimensions in Globesmart, the sort of the context that I work in terms of Indiana University and Bloomington. This is a list of the courses, I think you can see them here on the screen here, that I have taught at different times. Right now I'm teaching intensively the Global Business Environments course. It's a course for sophomores that's taught in classes of up to 500 students, 3 sections of 180 to 240. So we're fortunate at Indiana University in that all undergraduate students are required to take not 1, but 3 international business courses. So as sophomores, they are required to take the Global Business Environments course. I see what Manuel and the panel talked about firsthand in that they're very confident, they're overconfident, but yet I'm going to show you here the demographics of the class, and you're going to see that there are some differences that they're not expecting, cultural differences they're not expecting. So the global business environments, and then right now as we speak, I'm teaching 2 online MBA classes. So I'm not teaching the global business environments course right now. It's an 8-week course. I finished that in October. So now I'm switching to 2 online courses where the students are located all over the world. Some are military. They're on military bases. So in terms of, I have students in China. I have students in India. I teach cross-cultural management is a multinational firm. It's Cummins, the diesel engine company. And the students are located all over the world. They are managing cross-cultural teams. And so this is, they really need and enjoy the exploring their cross-cultural competence. And then I've done quite a bit of teaching in other countries also. So this is what I showed to my students. You might think of Indiana University as a Bloomington, Indiana, as a very small town. It is surrounded by cornfields, but it's very international, as many of your campuses are. So this is also an opportunity as we work with the students on global competence to focus, to get them out of the thinking that everything is easy and that culture doesn't make a difference, to shine the light at their class and their work projects and their activities in order to speed up their process of preparing them for the work world, which in my case, in the Global Business Environments course, is going to be in about 2.5 years. And some of them will start earlier because they aspire to getting an international internship. So this is my class. This is the list of countries that are represented in the group of about 500 that I just taught in the fall, beginning in August, finishing in October. And then I always prepare some of these slides to show the students something that they may not be aware of if they don't see it as a pie chart or as a table. So yes, most of the students are from the U.S., but quite a few are from China. You see Asia is well represented there, India, Thailand, South Korea, and then a number of other countries. And many of our U.S. students also come from cross-cultural backgrounds, or they have traveled abroad, or they've traveled with their parents. And so it's a way of focusing, of bringing the world to them and why culture matters to them. I always prepare this map. It changes a little bit from term to term, but I want to show them the countries that are represented, the populations, the markets, the languages, the geography that's represented in our typical class, right? So I think that they find it interesting, they find it amusing, but then quickly we start working on how can these differences and these demographics get in the way of smooth interaction, smooth teamwork, and those kinds of things. Okay, here is really what I think fascinates me, and I think I want to encourage us to focus on in terms of the hidden stuff of culture, or the sense of being overly confident. I put together, this is so easy for me to do, 6 examples of difficulties that come up. You probably have experience in these also. Difficulties that come up when putting students from the U.S., from China, from India, Latin America together on a team. Now, they may be a team that is working on a required project. It might be a consulting project. It might be some kind of a career-related activity that students participate in outside of the classroom, or it might be a couple of these teams or a couple of these issues I see through executive education or working with our master's students, for example. The key issue in all of these examples is that every one of these, this is about teams that have several countries represented, right? So some may be undergrad, some may be masters, some may be executive education teams. So here's something that comes up very often. Okay, team starts to work on a project, problem-solving meeting. One person on the team has no ideas, nothing to share, right? They are asked, what do you have to contribute? They're invited to participate. Do not participate. Meeting ends, everybody's going, everybody goes their way, everybody's very busy into other activities. Only the team leader is cleaning up, for example, or whoever coordinated the meeting. The person who had nothing to share is bubbling with ideas, with a lot of comments, with a lot of feedback. And of course, it's frustrating because everybody's gone, the team leader is thinking this person had nothing to contribute. They had a lot to contribute, just didn't happen at the right time. Example number 2, a project deadline is set. It's important for everybody to do their part so that the overall deadline can be met. One person who has a critical task is asked, can you do your part on time? The person says yes. When in their mind, they meant, no way, there's no way. The person knew there was no way. So what happens 2 weeks later when they come back together? The other folks are expecting the person's deadline to be met. It's not. And that person is frustrated. The person who said yes and meant no is as frustrated as everybody else because they expected everybody to understand that yes meant no, right? So this is where yes might mean yes, it might mean maybe, it might mean no. It's a cultural difference. It's a pattern. A real-world consulting project, right? Different members have different preferences for how quickly they develop recommendations, make assumptions, make decisions. Some want to go very fast, time is money, move quickly, explain the assumptions later. Others feel very uncomfortable going down the wrong path. Need to check with the supervisors, need to collect more data. So that's a pretty big difference. Problem-solving meeting. One person notices that the team is falling behind on the schedule and the deliverables. Takes it upon themselves to help the team by giving very straightforward feedback to the rest of the team. Thinking like a basketball team, going to fire everybody up, energize everybody, and then we'll get back on schedule. Just taking that approach may cause some team members to get their feelings hurt and consider that person to be mean, selfish, and uncaring. I see it very, very often. It's a recurring issue. Team meeting, a team gets ready to work. Some members of the team come in with an agenda, perhaps a timed agenda, and other members don't have any agenda at all. They think that agendas and something written on a piece of paper is really strange. How can you begin to work if you don't know the other people around you? Who took it upon themselves to create an agenda? When in other parts of the world, it's more common to chit-chat, to do small talk, and then get down to work. The work might not happen if you can't build trust, for example, or feel comfortable with those that you're going to be working with. And then, of course, I never fails, students have many, many examples of countries they've been in where there's an appointed time for a meeting. It's published. Everybody knows the appointed time. Some people arrive 5 minutes before the appointed time, some 1 minute, some right on time. In some places, 15, 20 minutes, right? When people aren't aware of this, the people who arrived 5 minutes or 10 minutes before the appointed time, as they start to see people stroll in 20 or 30 minutes after, begin to shoot dirty glances and look at their watches, but the person who is arriving after the appointed time has no clue that there's anything wrong, right? So these are all common symptoms. So this is where the cultural dimensions come in. Patterns that have been through survey, qualitative and quantitative research have uncovered the systematic differences across countries. And they're sort of like directions on a map. They're just differences that many times are hidden, that we teach to each other as members of a cultural group. We learn from others, and so these are reinforced over time, and they just become dimensions of difference, right? So you have heard of individualism and collectivism. So what I'm doing here is highlighting some of the main dimensions. So this is a continuum. It's a continuum, and they're sort of like opposite ends of a spectrum, from individualism on one side to collectivism on the other. So in individualistic countries, individuals are the major unit of organization, of rewards, of behavior. autonomy and independence is valued. Other countries are very group-oriented. That is, members align themselves with the wishes, the values of the group. Harmony is expected. You don't really stand out as an individual. You might be seen as selfish. So individualism, collectivism, and then there are several other dimensions. Power distance, equality versus hierarchy. Power distance low or high. In some countries, people value getting to the task versus establishing relationships. Relationships are always going to be important, but how do you start a meeting? Do you start with an agenda? Are you really focused on time or on the individuals? Who is there? What is their... Sometimes combined with power distance, that can be very, very important. Directness of communication. Do you tell people what you mean and mean what you say? Or do you sort of beat around the bush because that is more common, more acceptable in your culture, right? Being indirect, also called high context versus low context. And then decision making, uncertainty avoidance can be low or high. And these are just preferences across countries. Okay. Just like the long list of assessments that are available, there are also many sets of cultural dimensions. So if you find that, if at the end of the session you find that cultural dimensions and this approach, this perspective might be useful for students, whether it be STEM or whether it be languages, or whether it be some area of business, there are many sets of cultural dimensions that are available. They're not difficult to find. In my MBA training, I learned about Edward T. Hall. The Silent Language was a book that we had to read. That's where I learned about high context and low context cultures, monochronic or polychronic approaches to time and decision making and those kinds of things. Kluckhohn and Strodbach, again, similar but a different list of dimensions. Hofstede is probably the most widely used sets of dimensions. And then the Globesmart actually borrows, the Globesmart web tool borrows heavily from Hofstede. There are Schwartz, Value Survey, Trompenars, the Globe Study, and then the most recent ones I've come across are by an American working in France. Her name is Erin Meyer, and she has, she's very popular with my MBA students right now. She has a series of articles on HBR, some very nice videos that explain, I think, very clearly the cultural dimensions. Okay, and actually I can introduce you to Erin Meyer because I have a video here that is where Erin Meyer is being interviewed on CNN by Fareed Zakaria.
In today's globalized economy, you might be an American doing business in Rwanda, a French woman making a deal with Japan, or an Argentine trying to woo a new customer in Australia. You can do your business over the phone via Skype or hop on a plane. That's the easy part. The tough part is figuring out how to conduct yourself in a different culture. Is it Americans who don't like criticism and Germans who don't want you to mince words, or is it the other way around? And do you bow or not bow with your Japanese counterparts? Erin Meyer is a professor at INSEAD, an international business school with campuses all over the world. She is the author of The Culture Map. So, Americans are fascinated by the world, but what we really want to know is what do they think of us? Right. And in this map, what are the traits that you think of? And you live in France now, so you have a good perspective. What are the traits that people think of as distinctively American when it comes to doing business and interacting?
Well, one thing that you brought up a moment ago was this tendency to give a lot of positive feedback, and that might come off as being superficial or just confusing to people from other countries. So as you said, I've lived in France now for 15 years, and in France people are trained to give positive feedback a lot more implicitly and to give negative feedback a lot more bluntly than we do in the U.S. And I worked with a French client a while ago who had moved to the U.S. She had a new American boss. Her American boss called her into his office to tell her that her performance was unacceptable. But he started by telling her, in the way we do in the U.S., the things he felt she was doing well. And then by the time he got to the real message, she wasn't even listening anymore. She left that meeting thinking, wow, this was the best feedback I've ever received. So leaders today need to be, managers, all of us, need to be really aware of these cultural differences.
And flip it around. So if an American goes to France or Germany, they will tend to, they give a presentation, and the German might say, well, these were the 4 things I didn't like about what you do. Oh, he'd be right, blunt, and upfront about the disagreement, right?
It can be very surprising for an American, and when you're first getting used to it, it can be unsettling.
And what do you think of as some of the other dominant characteristics that, in other countries that people should be aware of? For example, if you're doing business in China, what would be the kind of key Chinese cultural, traits?
Well, one might be, when should you speak and when should you be quiet? And that's a very simple thing that we learn in our own cultural environment when we're children. I had a team I was working with recently where I had a group of Americans and 1 Chinese on the team. The Americans were all jumping in, talking on top of each other, and the Chinese person just sat quietly. Afterwards, I asked them how the meeting had gone. One of the Americans had said, well, this Chinese guy, he doesn't have anything to contribute. He's really shy. And I spoke to the Chinese, and he said, well, I can't find an opportunity to speak in all of this chaos and jumping in. Just knowing when to be quiet can help.
I'll stop it there. I also want to use this video as an example that has worked well for me to reach students, right? It's one thing if we give them a case or if we try to talk through certain situations, but I think they really need examples, and I find myself looking for different types of videos. Here's another video that is based also on Erin Meyer's work, but it's very different. Instead of an interview, it's more like an animation that is explaining 2 or 3 of her cultural dimensions in a way that makes sense to our students. So I'll share this one with you.
You might be a star negotiator in your own country, but in today's global economy, your skills may not automatically translate to other cultures. For instance, in some cultures, it's entirely appropriate to show emotion during a negotiation, to raise your voice, laugh passionately, or even put a friendly arm around your counterpart. In others, this much expression not only feels intrusive or surprising, but may be viewed as immature or unprofessional. Then there's open disagreement. Negotiators often assume that more expressive cultures are also more confrontational, but that isn't always the case. In some countries, such as France and Israel, emotions pour out, including disagreement. But for other very expressive cultures, such as Brazil, Mexico, and Saudi Arabia, open disagreement could be seen as insulting. Some less expressive cultures, such as Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands, see open disagreement and debate as positive and necessary, as long as it's expressed calmly and factually. Others tend to be both less emotional and non-confrontational, which means you'll have to be especially attuned to subtle cues for both positive and negative responses. It's also important to learn how others build trust. There are 2 distinct types, cognitive and affective, and in a business setting, the dominant type of trust varies from one culture to another. Cognitive trust is task-based. It comes from the head and is built on your counterpart's accomplishments, skills, and reliability. American culture offers a good example of this kind of trust. In the United States, getting too emotionally close to a business counterpart is seen as unprofessional, and mixing the personal and professional is seen as risky. Affective trust is relationship-based and comes from the heart. It arises from the feelings of emotional closeness, empathy, and friendship that are developed gradually through sharing meals, evening drinks, and coffee breaks. In China, for instance, negotiators are unlikely to trust their counterparts until an effective connection has been made. Adapting your negotiation approach accordingly will help you get to yes, or si, ja, oui, hai, and da.
A couple of things that came to mind when the panel was presenting earlier is, and something that I've realized for quite a while about culture is that we get so comfortable in our own way of doing things that I think we tend to think that that business and interactions is like an objective reality. Like there's only one meaning because we're looking at each other, we're working on similar activities, And I think until we convince our students or help them see that there really isn't an objective reality, it's about interpretation, it's about subtle cues, it's about different types of meanings, that we can help them understand that there's going to be a problem down the line at some point. The other thing that I face that's frustrating at times, and it's really interesting, is I get this debate among particularly undergraduate students when I ask them, so how, if you believe that there is an objective reality, what do you do about it when it's time to get in to prepare for a business situation? I get sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. I get a group who says pretty forcefully and strongly, I'm not going to worry about that because I'm a person who watches very closely, and so I'll adapt when I'm there. So I don't have to read a book, I don't have to read an article, I don't have to go prepare, I just have to concentrate on the person in front of me. The other group says, no, I have to be careful not to stereotype in a negative way, but a stereotype, a pattern, would help me understand the person that I'm going to be working with. And yes, they're not going to be a perfect representation of their cultural group, but it's a place to start. Right? So it took me a while to understand that some students really, really have a resistance to preparing, and I think it's well intended. Focusing, paying close attention, but then that would be a high price to pay if you're doing a negotiation situation, or somebody gets their feelings hurt, or if somebody walks away from the table because there's a lack of agreement or suspicion or those kinds of things. Okay, so the tool that we use intensively is called Globesmart. Think of, if you're familiar with the Hofstadter dimensions, think of the Hofstadter dimensions, but narrowed down to 5, and then there's a lot of information available where students can generate their own profile. That is, they can respond to a quick survey, which is 40 questions. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes. Then they can see their profile and compare their profile to the national average of almost 100 countries. I'll show you the 5 cultural dimensions. You'll see that it makes quite a bit of sense. 100 countries, and so not only can you see the profile, but also there are a lot of specific topics that it goes very deep in terms of the interactions, the keys to successful interactions in different countries. So these are the key questions, some of the key questions that can be answered by the information in Globesmart. What are China's core values and implications for business? What's the effective leadership style in India? How should I tailor my presentation for a Japanese audience, or for a German audience, or for a Korean audience? How can we effectively manage change across operations in France? How can we motivate innovation in Germany? What are the pitfalls of transferring knowledge in Brazil? How do Mexicans generally perceive hierarchy? How do I prepare for travel to China? Some of this information is very practical, like currencies, electrical power, what kind of adapters you need, how do you get around in the mass transportation system in different countries. And then one of the very popular topics is, if I'm in another country, what are some key topics that are safe to discuss with strangers, and what topics do I stay away from? It might be politics, it might be religion. In parts of Latin America, you wouldn't talk to a stranger about poverty, for example, or corruption. Everybody knows it's there, but it takes time to get to that level. So there are safe topics that can make the process go smoother. All right. So this is the home screen of Globesmart, and what you're looking at here are 3 icons. One is a place where you can explore your profile, compare it to other countries. The Globesmart, the little globe there, is where you can go in and find deep information about 100 countries, almost 100 countries. And then Learning Paths is a really nice education tool that allows you to quiz yourself and gain competence and watch videos and entertain various scenarios in different countries. So It can go very deep, and it's very useful for an educator to create assignments and work with the students on this. All right. These are the 5 cultural dimensions. You'll see that they're very similar to the other list that I showed earlier. Independence and interdependence. This is like independence is individualism, interdependence is collectivism. Egalitarian and status is about power distance. Risk and certainty is about uncertainty avoidance, low or high. Direct and indirect communication, very, very useful. And then task versus relationship orientation. And then it's, those are the, you can see that it's a continuum. I want to show you quickly the countries. So the way that Globesmart organizes the countries is by region. So you can take a look at the number of countries in Europe that have deep information. And every year they add more countries. I think when I started using it about 15 years ago, there were maybe 65 countries, and right now it's very close to 100. Asia Pacific, the Americas, Middle East, and Africa. Okay. And then also the tool has these icons to visually help the students understand what is meant with a very simple diagram about individualism versus collectivism, egalitarian versus status, risk versus certainty, direct and indirect, and then task versus relationship. And there are lots of examples. There are videos. The other thing I want to remind the students when they're dealing with communication patterns or somebody who doesn't talk in a meeting, what's their native language? Is English their native language? Many times I think with the ease of travel, the ease of communication in English, particularly English-speaking students, lose sight of the fact that somebody they're working with is operating in their second or English as their second or third language. So I try to put them in a situation of going to Latin America to do a study abroad, working on projects with, let's say, all native Spanish speakers when my students have maybe studied it in high school or maybe a year or two of college, and ask them how comfortable they would feel contributing ideas, participating in a very fast-moving meeting, for example. So even English as a second language, not an actual cultural dimension, but something that fits here and can get in the way. I want to show you some of the plots. So the way that these plots are developed by the Globesmart folks is they get thousands of people in different countries to respond to the survey about different preferences in different business situations. So what I want to show you is a set of slides that I use with my students to show them the national average of different countries. And I think you're going to see the value of this. So these are the 5 dimensions: independent, interdependent, egalitarian status, the same list that I showed you on a table before, but now they're in this, they're on this slide. The blue square always represents the country profile. So in this case, this would be a country that would score, that would be balanced between all of the dimensions. It's not a, it's a country that I've created in order to show balance and perspective, although there are some countries that are pretty close to the middle. Okay, the United States, we tend to be individualistic, egalitarian, risk-oriented, pretty direct in communication, and task-oriented. Maybe not a surprise to people here. UK, Canada, Australia, Republic of Ireland, New Zealand, and then here they all together. So Globesmart allows you to plot up to 7 or 8 countries so that you can see the comparisons and the similarities or the differences. Right? So I get the students to explore the history of colonization and those kinds of things and how culture is transmitted. I also like to make the point that how similar these countries are, in spite of the fact that independence for many of them happened 200 years ago, but still we maintain a similar pattern. So that want them to think about the business situation. And then I start showing them quite a few differences from the U.S. perspective. Germany, France, Poland, Italy, Mexico, India, China, Japan. And then, if I really want to highlight, if I want to test them to see if they get some of these differences in decision-making, effective leadership styles, how authority and power works, then I put a student in the position of being country manager, or regional manager of several Asian countries. Here are the Asian profiles. Singapore is close to the center, but you're going to watch that there's a strong movement to the right. There are the Asian countries here. Remember, the U.S. was way on this other side. So then what I might do, even in a class of 240 students, is get a volunteer, and I make him sort of, I try to get him or her from sort of a typical profile from the U.S. perspective, and then make them, for a few minutes, the regional manager for all these countries, and ask the rest of the class, what are their meetings going to be like? How is their communication going to be different than Indianapolis or Chicago in these regions of the world? Okay, and so it's very useful that way. Okay, and then what I've done also is captured all 100 countries, so then we can explore any country in more detail. By the way, in the slides there is a link that allows you to explore Globesmart for a trial period of about 2 weeks, all of the features for about 2 weeks. So you can either look at the slide deck or contact me, and I can send you that link. All right. Let me throw something out that I'm likely to do in a class. Can you select a country? So I've talked about decision making, small talk, power distance, those kinds of things. Can you think of a country, let's see if this works like it does in some of my classes. Can you think of a country and a topic that we might explore in Globesmart? I want to go into a section of the country section of Globesmart, see if we can find a topic. So do I have a volunteer? How does something work in another country? An aspect of business or interaction. Yes? Russia, okay. Let's try Russia. All right. So Russia is organized in Europe. Give me a topic that you'd like to explore about Russia. So one of your students wants to know something, or a business person wants to know something about Russia. Okay, so let's go to culture and customs. Okay, dining, entertaining, and hosting. I don't think we're going to get that specific, right, about ice cream, but if you wanted to know how does dining, entertaining, and hosting work in Russia versus the United States, right? So informal gatherings at work, etiquette, alcohol is going to be a big topic, right? Toasting, seating arrangements, visiting somebody's home. What do you bring? Gifts, wine, and sweets, so appropriate gifts to bring for your Russian counterparts. Be prepared to accept all food and beverages. So usually what they do in these topics is they give you what typically happens and then advice over here, advice or strategy. So if you're from the U.S. and you want to make a positive impression, or you want to build smooth relations, then you would do some of these things. And then the more you explore the tool, you're probably going to find several videos of a Russian explaining their culture to a foreigner, right? And you can go very, very deep. So let me just show you some of the drop-down menus. Communicating effectively, managing people, customer and supplier relationships, dining, entertaining, and hosting, knowledge transfer, and then over here, you can explore, see here's a video here, the sense of pride that Russians have, right? Group orientation, the importance of hierarchy, those kinds of things, and then implications. So what does this mean for managers? So over here, general core values and implications, national diversity, business protocol, Some of this is very practical too. Business protocol, greetings, names and titles. In some countries where exchanging business cards is very ritualized, that'll have some tips there. And then advice. A handshake is the appropriate greeting in Russia. Men occasionally pat each other on the back with the other hand while shaking hands with the other hand. And then women, and then the way that Russians interact with each other, their compatriots versus foreigners. And then, so you can see that that there are many ways to structure assignments to get the students to explore a particular country or a region of the world as a way to help them enhance their cross-cultural competence. Okay. So the rest of it, I think, is I would encourage you to explore that, to explore the information there. I would use the trial period, the trial version, in order to create your own profile, compare it to other countries, and explore it. Now, I'm not here to pitch Globesmart or say, you know, I don't work for Globesmart, or I'm not saying subscribe to Globesmart. What I'm trying to do is give you an overview of the cultural dimensions and then find a tool like Hofstede's website or other websites that work with cultural dimensions, and then use the tools that might be available to help students that way. So how would I use the cross-cultural dimensions and a tool like Globesmart? A very easy assignment would be to get students to do a country analysis. So country analysis typically is to get them to prepare for an expansion to another country by researching the history of the country, the political system, the economic system, the financial system, but an easy one to do with a tool like Globesmart or Hofstede's is the cultural dimension. Right? So it's one important part of the country analysis, or PASTEL, or CAGE framework, for example. There are many names for this type of an assignment. Cross-cultural management cases that involve interactions between people in different countries, and get them to use the tool in order to explore what's going on, or get to a deeper understanding, or develop recommendations for operating smoothly in that country. And these are three of my favorite cases: Siemens AG Global Development, 3 teams that are having lots of problems between India, Germany, and the US. Very realistic multinational firm case. Emerson Electric in Suzhou, China, and managing a global team, Greg James at Sun Microsystems. Greg James is from the US. He has to manage a team in Dubai, another one in India, I think one in Latin America, and another team in a Western European country. And it really highlights time zones, it highlights misunderstanding, decision-making, directness of communication, and some of that's pretty interesting here about this case, Manuel, is that it has a lot of the work is being done virtually across, you know, using web conferencing and those kinds of things. So the issue of time zones and miscommunication over email is also highlighted in that case. So it brings in the digital space. Cross-cultural negotiation simulations to prepare students to go abroad for short-term or long-term assignments. And then to get them to prepare for maybe someday being an expatriate manager in another country. What would they need to know? How would they prepare for that type of an experience? Okay, so, and you'll see my contact information toward the end. If I can share any assignments, if you want to explore an assignment or you want some ideas on different assignments, I'd be happy to share those with you. I use them intensively in several of my classes. Basically, anything having to do with culture, I use Globesmart to get the students to use it, and they love it. All right. And then this is a sort of an example of a list of, this might be a homework assignment, a list of tasks. Not that you need to capture the full idea here, but it's fairly easy to give them specific tasks and then to evaluate them on a write-up of these tasks, and then their conclusions, their recommendations they would have based on the information they found. Okay? And then this can be graded, and you can see how their cross-cultural acumen is improving over time. The other thing I like to do is if I have a strong number of students, I always have like students from the US, but if I have a core group from India and a core group from China and then maybe a group of students from different countries in Latin America, what I might have them do in the classroom is work in teams. I put all of the US students on several teams, all of the Indian students on one team, all of the Chinese students on their own teams. And then I have the Americans present to the Chinese about China, or the Latin Americans present to the Indians about India. And the question is, for everybody is this realistic? So the information that your counterparts found about your country, is that accurate? You know, what would you qualify? What would you change? And it tends to be pretty accurate. The students realize the value of it. So again, with different dimensions, different tools, I think hopefully this is giving you some ideas on how to use it in your situation. Okay, so Rebecca was very interested in leaving you with some ideas based on this session, right? Which I support very much. So the reason why I asked you to sit in tables, if you could work with those or move around to a table with several other folks, the question is, so first introduce yourselves and then share what types of students you work with and how the cultural dimensions might be useful in your classrooms. The idea here is to generate some ideas for how to use either this kind of a tool, the cultural dimensions, in order to stimulate some ideas on how to enhance your students' cross-cultural competence. Okay? Hopefully you had a chance to learn from a couple of folks at your table, and hopefully now making that visual connection, we can keep the conversation going. And of course, you're welcome to contact me if you have ideas or if you would like any tips from my classes. I'd be happy to work with you on that. So this is the slide that I showed you that has the free, it's like a coupon where if you click on that, if you click on this website, and I can send it to you. If you contact me by email, I can send you the website so that you can click on it. And then it's got some quick directions on how to set up your own password. That way you can explore the features for about 2 weeks. Okay? You will have full access for about 2 weeks. And then you can see how it works and then maybe consider the tool or something similar that wouldn't be, it is pricey, but the idea is to give you sort of a sense of what's possible here. Okay. This is a slide that's related to the booklet that Rebecca has put together for everyone. Another tool that has lots and lots of classroom-type international business sources is Global Edge. This is a resource that's out of one of our other cyber institutions, Michigan State University. So I would encourage you to explore Global Edge. Most of this is not, doesn't require a subscription. You can get syllabi, you can get assignments, you can get simulations, lots and lots of information and data for, again, international business or cross-cultural competence assignments. And then the final slide here has my email address and my telephone number, and I would be happy to share my perspective and my content with any of you. It's been a real pleasure. My culture and international business is my passion. I'm very grateful to the CIBER network. I haven't told you this, Rebecca, but when I was a PhD student, the CIBER at the University of Michigan sponsored several of my field studies. So I've always had a soft spot for cyber in my heart, going back to the 1990s. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attendance. Thanks.